felt like in a parallel universe from what's actually unfolding on the ground here. The throne speech said Canadians want bold action. And it talked about how Canada wants to be a leader in building low carbon steel and aluminum and cars. It did use the language about that no one will be left behind in this as we take action on climate. And yet, really, I think it stood out that there were no hints in this throne speech of what a real just transition plan would look like. We've been promised a Just Transition Act. There was no mention of that in the throne speech. The throne speech did say now we must go further and faster. It talked about the cap on oil and gas emissions, investing in public transit, mandating zero emission vehicles, continuing to increase the carbon price. It did speak to the fact that a federal adaptation policy is coming. It spoke to the need to invest in adaptation and prevention with respect to floods and fires and coastal erosion. None of that's new. All of that has been previously announced and was part of the election promises that we heard. So there were no new initiatives, as I said earlier. And then the throne speech went on to list a few other agenda items, gun violence, anti-racism, anti-hate, reconciliation. Oddly, on something like gun violence, they were more specific than they were on climate. But I would also note nothing on pharmacare, nothing on the housing crisis. And so it did strike me as I was listening to it, Canadians just returned another minority. They have signaled that they want political parties to collaborate and to cooperate. We were all hearing some buzz in the news over the last few weeks about a possible agreement between the Liberals and the NDP. And yet I was struck that the throne speech seemed to give almost nothing to the NDP. Like there was no, in the context of that minority collaboration, it felt like the Liberals were daring them in some weird game of chicken and choosing to play hardball. Like what we didn't get was something in the spirit of cross-party collaboration. And if you compare it to what I had in the Observer piece, my mock throne speech, so nothing. Just to give you some sense of how hopelessly optimistic I am, I still harbored some little thought that maybe, given all these events, given Glasgow, given the fact that construction has been forced to stop on the Trans Mountain Pipeline because of the flooding, I thought maybe they would take all of those occasions to say, we're canceling the project. But of course they didn't. As I said earlier, they didn't announce anything on just transition. They didn't announce any new bold idea like a carbon budget so that they could be held accountable in the near term. So they aren't in emergency mode. We are still in the period of the phony war. And we still need to force them there. It's our government and we've got our work cut out for us. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Seth. So I'm wondering if folks have any questions specifically about the throne speech before we get into what we're going to do about it. If you do have a question, please write it in the chat. And we'll do our best to field them. Give people a couple of seconds to get their questions in. Yes, how do we get into action? Well, I would love to talk about that. Are we working with Fridays for Future Youth? We are in some areas across the country. We don't have a coordinated plan on that right now, but it's definitely in the works. And Terry, if you're interested in collaborating on that, I'd love to hear from you. Seth, what do you think about the NDP response to the speech?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I watched Jagmeet Singh right afterwards. I think, to my last point, he seemed genuinely surprised, as I was, at how little was offered. I think they'd been having some productive discussions. I think they expected to see a couple items in there that were kind of an olive branch to some of the NDP agenda items, and they basically got the door slammed on that. So what I saw was the NDP leader actually, I thought he was genuinely taken aback.
Some of these questions are humorous for sure.
more comment than question, I think. Yeah.
And then from a lobbying point of view, should we be pressing the NDP too? Yes, always, definitely.
And we did talk about this in our last workshop like this, that it's a minority government, and they appear to be choosing to move from confidence vote to confidence vote, and each one of those is another opportunity for the NDP to demand certain things, which means we have to demand of them that they prioritize climate emergency actions in those negotiations. I am hearing more. I think within the discussions in the NDP, there's a realization that they needed to push harder than they did last time on this file. I did have an opportunity I was asked to brief Jagmeet Singh before he went to COP to Glasgow, and highlighted some of the things I thought they should be pressing for. So the more they keep hearing this from all of you, the better.
Great. Any more questions before we move on to our action? All right. Oh, is there a plan to do some disrupting actions? Joyce, I'd love to hear some of your ideas on that. What kind of disrupting actions do you want to do?
I'd be ready to do anything. I'd be ready to stop traffic on the 401. If they go ahead with the 413, I'd be ready to lie down in front of bulldozers. I mean, I'm getting to the sense that I don't feel that that letters and signing petitions and stuff is going to do it. I think there has to be disruption in the way of that all large social movements have been successful at pressing and requiring change. Otherwise, society is just not going to be allowed to carry on as normal.
Joyce, I think that's a really interesting point. You're reminding me of the work. I can't remember which theorist did it, but the work that says you need like 3 to 5% of a population to be willing to hit the streets in order to make a change. And so I think the lesson for me and what you're saying is like I agree that we do need some disrupting actions, and we do need to make our voices louder. And also we need to make sure that we have 3 to 5% of people doing that with us in order to have enough power to actually move it. Because if we do that now without organizing the power that we need, it won't be effective. It's very easy to marginalize it if you don't have enough people. But also 3 to 5% of people isn't that many people. So I think that there's to me, that what we need is to build our movement so that we can have enough power to do that. I think that there's a two-pronged strategy. Well, there's several strategies that the CEU is now working on. One of them being to, like Seth said, brief the government, be as useful as possible. The second is to organize people who are in emergency mode across sectors, across provinces, who are willing to use the full power of their organizations and the full power of their social networks to build that 3 to 5% of people who are willing to take action. And there's also a lot of pressure that needs to come in mobilizing our provincial governments to put pressure on the federal government.
If I may, I think, Joyce, you're right that peaceful civil disobedience is a part of any successful movement like this, and you're not alone. I think there's a lot of people who are ready to do that. I see people pointing out in the chat, there's Wet'suwet'en solidarity actions happening. If there is a chapter of Extinction Rebellion where you are, I would encourage you to reach out to them and connect with them. Here in the Lower Mainland, the tree sits blocking the Trans Mountain Pipeline have just resumed yesterday. So for those of you who are ready to go that route, I encourage you to go that route.
Mm-hmm. We've seen how effective it is. Like, for example, with Fairy Creek and moving the provincial government to move faster than they would have on the deferrals on old growth logging. More to be done there, but I think civil disobedience is the way forward for sure. I hear you, Joyce. And also, it's a good point that the Wet'suwet'en solidarity protests are doing those disruptive actions. And when we consider how much emissions the Wet'suwet'en are keeping out of our atmosphere, it is certainly a good thing to support. And that's the kind of direct action you can absolutely be involved in right away. I have a more specific idea of something that I would like to do today. And I think most people don't pay attention to the throne speech, and the government really doesn't expect people to pay attention to the throne speech. And so my suggestion of something we can do right now is to call Steven Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment, and tell him what we think about it. And so I think it would be pretty interesting for us to take, as a group, a few minutes and reflect on what we want to say to him, how we're feeling about the throne speech, what it signals to us about their priorities. I think a lot of you have suggested how you feel and what you think of their priorities in the chat. But it's important that they hear from us too. And so having that two-pronged strategy of civil disobedience for sure, but also just making sure that the government knows we're paying attention is really important. So I want to just discuss a bit about what we know about Steven Guilbeault and how we can, like on this call right now, just let him know what we think. So next slide, Emma, or 2 slides. And then next one after that. So I just pulled up this bio on Steven Guilbeault. I was watching him speak at COP26, and he one of the reporters said, well, you used to be a climate activist. And he looked so offended. He was like, I am still a climate activist. I'm just in government now. And she gave him this great look of just like, I don't believe you. But I could tell, like, from his personal perspective, he really wants to be seen as a climate champion, as a climate activist. It's his entire career and his legacy that I feel is on the line. As Carrie just mentioned, he was a Greenpeace activist. He worked at Équiterre. So I think he is someone that, because it's so much a part of his identity to be seen that way, we have a leverage point that we should use. And I also think he's not expecting right now to get 50 or 60 or however many people are on this call right now, 138 phone calls letting him know that the throne speech did not communicate emergency. So I would love for us to take a few minutes now to reflect on, next slide, Emma, reflect on a few things that we would like to say to him. Joyce, you can tell him that you're ready to hit the streets. But what do you personally most want to say? What's a story from your own life, your community, or your industry that communicates what you're facing in the climate emergency? And then what do you want to see Minister Guilbeault say or do that would actually show you that he's in emergency mode. So I'm just gonna ask you to take 5 minutes to reflect on that. Emma, maybe you could put on some music for the 5 minutes. And then we'll come back, and I have all the information on how to make the phone call, a little script and all of that. But like, just take a few moments to think about what are the things that for you are the most important.
I'm a Berlin Wall, I'm a communist. You're a wrecking ball in a summer dress. You're the horizon line, I'm the last sunset. I might be going down, but I'm not set yet. I'm as white as a ghost, digging foolish gold. I will man my post, but I won't do what I'm told. Got a purple heart from a bloody war. Can't take it anymore. They say that good things come to those who wait. If you snooze, then you lose. So don't hesitate. Out of sight, out of mind, out of luck, out of wine. Don't you say that I'm out of my mind. I've been talking trash, but it ain't my fault. Every time I move, somebody's in my spot. They say that good things come to those who wait. If you snooze, then you lose. So don't hesitate. Got nowhere to go. I know. It's only you and me. All the good things coming free. You be April Stevens, I'll be April Wine. You be Israel, I will be Palestine. Come on, teach me, Tiger. Come on, show me tricks. Let me take my time and take a couple lazy licks. Are you feeling blue? Through and through and through. Where do we find you now? Around, around, around. All the dirty blondes playing blue-eyed soul. You won't hear our songs on your radio. Every note we sing can be solid gold. Every boy can be Romeo. They say that good things come to those who wait. Good things come if you take the bait. At a rummage sale at the Sally Ann, everything is cheap. Love should last a life, or at least a year, but it lasts a week. I'm the Berlin Wall, and that ain't all. I'm a total mess. You're a wrecking ball, I'm a wrecking ball in a summer dress.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. So let's go to the next slide, Emma. So here's the instructions. You can now put yourself on mute. I've left the phone number. If you're on a landline and you're worried about long distance, you can use your cell phone. Most cell phone plans are long distance included across Canada, but double check. If you're worried about that, you can send your comments by email. I put the email there, but I think phoning is better. And let's go to the next slide, Emma. So here's a little script I put together that will just leave up for you while you call. So for me, I'll say, my name is Tracy Maynard. I live on the Shishaswea on the Sunshine Coast. My MP is Patrick Weiler. I am young and I want to thrive and have a thriving future. On Friday, my grandma is having a funeral, and my best friend who loves my grandma can't be there because she is trapped in Chilliwack, evacuated and surrounded by water. So the climate emergency is feeling very personal to me right now. And I'm calling because when I heard the throne speech yesterday, I felt like you weren't taking it seriously. I didn't see the government prioritizing it. And I want to see from you that you're telling the truth about the emergency, that you're creating the institutions to get the job done. I want to see first responders funded. I want to see emissions drastically reduced, and I need to hear the truth from you in order to trust you. Canadians are ready to act on this. I'm ready to act on this, and my friends and neighbors feel like we're a lot further ahead of the government. So we're pushing you now, and we want a bolder response from you than we heard in the throne speech. Thanks a lot. Call me back, and then you can leave your contact information. So it doesn't have to be a very formal phone call like Joyce and others. If you're angry, it's okay to tell them. But also if you're related to a specific industry, if you're like a nurse, or if you are a grandparent or a farmer, and you have something specific to your industry or your personal experience that you want to let them know about, please do include that as well. So we are going to all, I guess maybe, are there any questions about making this phone call before we do it? For folks who don't have questions, you can put yourself on mute and make the call. And then when you finish making the call, let us know in the chat, because we're going to count up how many calls that they received. Thank you. Okay, is everyone finished? You can still continue on. Maybe someone could scroll back through the chat and count up how many calls have been made for me. That would be great. Or maybe you can just let me know if you need a few more minutes. We filled his inbox. All right, well, if you didn't get a chance to leave a message, you can send an email. That'll be a nice surprise for him in the morning. I'm really enjoying reading what you folks said. This chat is really interesting. Thank you. Emma, do you want to go to the next slide and we'll talk about what's next? So I get that all of us are pretty angry and disappointed. How did it feel to make the call? You can just say in the chat how it felt for you to make the call. And then let's keep this going. So is there anyone in your life that you could help to make a similar call? And if you now have the spirit and you want to make more calls, you can also call your MP. Call your local MP. You can let them know that you called the minister, and you can let him know, let whatever your MP is, let them know what your message was to the minister. And then yeah, just let us know if you hear back from your MP or from the minister. I'd love to hear that. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about what's next. This workshop was supposed to have both the throne speech and the mandate letters. So once the mandate letters are released, we will do that workshop right away. And that again will be focused on the specific sectoral workshops or sectoral industries that we're mobilizing and organizing right now. I know that there are many folks on this call who have a lot of different angles and interests when it comes to climate change, and it really speaks to how the climate crisis really is infecting every area of our lives. And so I know that many of us are like, but my thing is not on this list, and that's fine. We can still work with you, but I specifically am working on mobilizing those sectors right now too. So there's a lot of other groups working on things, and we always partner. So if you have an idea of something that we should be working on, or you feel like we've missed something today, you can let me know. That's totally fine. I'd love to hear from you. So we have the mandate letter. When it's released, we'll call another meeting. We would love for you to donate to Get Undone Checkpoint. So the folks in Wet'suwet'en have been organizing for years, against decades, I think now, against LNG expansion into their territory and the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So they are literally standing freezing cold on logging roads, being brutalized by the RCMP right now. Seth has just put a whole bunch of links in the chat of ways that you can support in different ways, but Indigenous resistance is the frontline resistance of the climate crisis right now. And so I highly encourage you to get involved in that and learn more. We will send out a bit more information in our follow-up email. So you can look for that in your email. So we'll have all those links, so you don't have to worry if you can't find it in the chat right now. On December 13th, our BC campaign, which now has over 330 organizations who have joined on, will be doing a candle vigil at MLA offices. So we are just figuring out the details of that, so please stay tuned. We'll be sending out an email. And for folks who are not in BC, you can still do a candle vigil. And the candle vigil is to honor all of the people and beings of all types that have been killed in the climate emergency in Canada this year. And we're specifically doing it at MLA offices in BC, so they feel the pressure and are connecting. We're connecting our personal grief and our personal concern to a public action. And it's a good way to organize. A lot of the times when we're organizing on specific policy agendas, there's a lot of groups who can't participate for whatever reason. There's one part of the plan they don't agree with. But a candle vigil is something that all of us can participate in. And it's something we all know what's at stake in the climate crisis. And a lot of us are carrying a lot of anger and a lot of grief, and it's a time for us to show up in collective expression and honor the people who we have lost. I'm very aware that, you know, the casualties of the climate crisis are really stacking up. You know, we've got the storms coming in BC again now, and I know that there's a big storm on the other side of the country in Atlantic provinces, and so if we're not honoring those we've lost now, we're not going to do it ever. And so it's really important that culturally we make sure that every life matters and that we are honoring it. I was really struck in the throne speech that there was no mention of the folks lost in the heat dome or the mudslides. It was just a very casual reference to bad stuff happening in BC. And that's not appropriate for the moment we're in at all. We have a lot of organizing happening in across the country, but specifically right now in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So if you are in those provinces and you are either representing an organization or you have some real passion for organizing, Emma Norton is our organizer there, and we'll send you more details. We are hiring, we're recruiting actively for a new team member. So we're looking for an organizer to join us in the prairies, specifically somewhere in Alberta or Saskatchewan, and also in Ontario. So I'll include those job postings in the follow-up email. And if you have any other updates that you want people to know about, you can just put them in the chat, and then we will also include those in the follow-up email if they are climate emergency related. So please feel free to share those with us, and we will try and send out a really comprehensive list at the end of this meeting. Thank you so much for coming. It was really nice to spend this hour with you. Thank you all for making the phone calls. Oh, there's a hand up. So do you have a question?
I'm asking them to unmute. So Dorothy, Elisa, you should be able to speak if you unmute yourself.
My apologies. First of all, I'm not Dorothy. I'm Rose Dyson, but somehow I ended up in Dorothy's slot. She's got her own, and she's on this call as well. I guess I want to go back to Seth Klein's remarks. I certainly appreciated them. I heard the throne speech in total, and I also, before that, read Seth's proposed mock throne speech. I'm just wondering, when it comes to lobbying efforts, how we can more effectively hold the government to account on the basis of that excellent blueprint that he provided. I somehow haven't heard much about that tonight.
Thanks. You know, just so folks know, here with the Climate Emergency Unit, we organize events like this, which are a way for all of you to try to join together and with us to take individual actions like this. But our main organizing model with the Climate Emergency Unit is to actually bring together coalition tables to advance the specific emergency ideas that you see articulated in my mock speech. So we partnered with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment to create a national coalition table to advance the idea of a ban on fossil fuel advertising. We've brought together 20 plus organizations and a BC climate emergency table that's advancing a bunch of these ideas. Emma is doing the same thing in Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland. There's the arts and culture table, sectoral table that Anjali and Anthony work with. There's a faith table. And this is why when you see Tracy's telling you what's coming is the more sectoral organizing tables, where the idea is for each relevant minister, we're trying to come together, articulate what the climate emergency agenda is for their portfolio, and collectively work to harangue them about what that agenda needs to be. So what you're seeing tonight is only one piece of the organizing model that we're working with. Primarily, we don't organize individuals, we organize organizations into coalition tables to advance these ideas.
Thanks, thanks, Seth.
Is there anything else before we close up? What other truths might you expect to hear from a politician who tells the truth? Do you want to answer that one, Seth?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the question?
What other truths might you expect to hear from a politician who tells the truth?
Well, I tried to give a sense of that in the mock throne speech. Primarily, what we need to hear is an end to this falsehood that we can be serious about climate while still expanding the production of oil and gas. So certainly keeping their feet to the fire on what they mean by this cap on oil and gas emissions is going to be really central. But more than that, we need them to tell a story. And this is why it's so important to cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. We need them to say, we're not going to have new fossil fuel infrastructure, and that we are now setting on a path of winding down our fossil fuel use, our fossil fuel extraction. But what we mean when we say no one will be left behind, it has to be made concrete. That's and so this is another campaign idea you're going to hear more from us about, is the need for a just transition, transfer real money, just transition agencies in each province, so that people can actually see that they won't in fact be left behind. It's really great that basically 20% of you live in ridings with cabinet ministers. And so where we'll go once we get the mandate letters from you is for each of those ministers telling the truth. They have their own little bit to tell about how to tell the truth, whether they're in labor or health or what have you. After our last call, somebody from the call contacted me who lives in Patty Haidu's riding. So she was the Minister of Health right through the pandemic. She's now the Minister for Indigenous Services. And so after our last call, a couple of you folks, people like you who live in that riding, went and met with her. And I talked to them ahead of time. And we talked about who is Patty Haidu and what's this, interestingly, she represents the riding that C.D. Howe represented. We talked about the fact that in the pandemic, as Minister of Health, she had been in emergency mode. And so what does it mean to now translate that and bring that same sense of urgency to the climate emergency file? So for all of you the 20% of you who live in a riding with a minister, let me reiterate what I said last time. If you're ready to meet with them, reach out to us. You can email me at seth@climateemergencyunit.ca or email info@climateemergencyunit.ca. And we'll help prep you. We'll walk you through what do we know about your minister and their mandate and their portfolio, and how can you engage them in a way that tries to shift them.
Thanks, Seth. Any more questions before we close up? Can we start setting up some of these needed institutions on a volunteer basis and demanding that they be funded so they can actually function?
Yeah, actually on that, so another campaign we're hoping to launch in the new year, and that I mentioned in the mock throne speech, modeled on the idea of the Wartime Information Board. We need a climate emergency information board. So something where the kind of messaging that we got in the pandemic, ubiquitous daily messaging about what this means and how to do it, we need that for climate now. And we need a well-resourced federal agency that actually does that commissions work from arts and culture sector people, that is commissioning polling and working with social scientists and buying advertising and making it clear to people that we are in fact in emergency mode.
And I actually would argue that a lot of the institutions we've been creating institutions on a volunteer basis this whole time. And that can no longer be relied upon because it is the government's job, and to act at the speed and scale that's required, that's what's needed. And especially to make sure that everybody is covered by the solutions that are proposed. All right, folks, I think it's time to end this meeting. Thank you so much for coming. And I love the energy that's happening in the chat right now. Do you have many people well, answer a couple more. We've got one more minute. Do you have any people in Quebec and in French? There's a pile of ministers. Yes, so yes, we have identified that a significant amount of the ministers that have ties to the climate file are in Quebec. We have a partnership and with an organization in Quebec and a organizer there named Anthony. And so if you have folks in Quebec that you want to connect us with, please let us know at the info@climateemergencyunit.ca, and we will connect you with our folks in Quebec. And we have done 41 calls for those who have reported in today. So great job, everyone. And yeah, let's keep phoning the minister and phone your MP, keep that energy going. And we'll talk to you soon. Don't forget about December 13th, you're lighting your candle. I've been lighting my candle every Monday night. It's a nice ritual. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Good night.